You're enjoying Racing World. It's brought to you by Perspective Group. It's your global motorsport podcast show brought to you in conjunction with Race Control magazine.
Silly season continues. More driver movements, more driver changes, more drivers looking for drives, more drivers with drives. Is much and much more news about driver movements for 2023 in this edition of Racing World for the last week in September 2022. Well, welcome back to another edition of Racing World. This week we're just going to focus mainly on what's happened in the last 2 weeks since we last spoke in the conclusion of the 2022 NTT IndyCar series, and what a great season it was. Fitting champion and Will Power as well. Really thought that was a superb all season long drive from him, and he deserved that championship. But more on that maybe a little bit later on. But what we're looking at now is driver movements. I'm going to stay with the US theme for a little bit, and congratulations Jacob Douglas going back to exclusive Autosport in 2023 for a second season in USF 2000. I think that this is a fantastic move. Well done, Jacob. You're going to just cement everything that you learned in this first year and make the second year just that much stronger. No new tracks. You've visited them all once before. You know the team now. They know you. This is time to extract it a little bit more. And we saw that from you in the last part of the season, certainly in those last few races in USF 2000. So congratulations, Jacob Douglas, back at USF 2000 for 2023. Right, moving on to someone who might not be back, and that's Nicholas Latifi, seen down here in the Toyota Racing Series years ago, and of course been at Williams Formula One team for quite some time now. Looking like Latifi is certainly on the out for 2023. Where would Latifi end up? I don't think that he'll end up in a Formula One drive. In many ways that's a shame, but he's facing the same scenarios in many ways as Daniel Ricciardo. There's only so many seats, and where do you go? So I think that we've seen the last of Latifi in Formula One. Who would replace him? Now that is a big question, and that we don't have an answer to. Speaking of Williams, Alex Albon will be back this weekend in the car in Singapore after his rather urgent medical emergency, we'll call it, with his appendicitis issue and then having to go into an ICU and everything, only a few weeks away. And again, as I said just a couple of weeks ago, it shows you the fitness of these young drivers and how fit they are and how quickly they can combat that. But Albon expected to be back in the car at the Singapore Grand Prix this weekend. Someone we may or may not see back in a car next year is Jimmy Johnson. The number 48 Carvana, oh that's a mouthful, isn't it? Chip Ganassi Racing entry is unlikely to be a full-time entry for Jimmy. He said that he doesn't want to do a full-time season next year. I read into that yes, I want to do some, and you can guarantee one of them is going to be the Indy 500. So I think that we might see Jimmy back in that fifth, maybe Ganassi entry for the 500, or someone will take over the 48 entry full-time. There's certainly plenty of talent out there right now, but Jimmy's days of a full-time season have come to a conclusion. Staying with the IndyCar thing for a little bit, and Benjamin Peterson announced this morning that he'll be driving for the AJ Foyt Racing team next year. So Benjamin moves up from the Indy Lights program, another graduate of the Road to Indy series, and we'll see him in the AJ Foyt machine next year. So that's one graduate that's coming up. Dalton Kellett, who also drives for the Foyt team, is hoping to retain his seat with AJ Foyt Racing, the young Canadian, hoping that he'll be back for another season, and that's currently under negotiation. Another driver from Indy Lights hoping to maybe make the big time in IndyCar next year, Stingray Robb. Now we saw Hunter McElrea fighting it out with Stingray Robb just recently, and Robb saying that he had two options on the table. One was to stay in Indy Lights, the second one was to look at IndyCar. Priority one, or plan A, was always to stay in Indy Lights. It's now flipped, and he's thinking that maybe IndyCar is a solution for him, and he's testing with three teams. I don't know who they are. They are three separate teams, and he'll be testing between now and mid-November with those teams. So it'll be very interesting to see just how that all plays itself out. And then of course there's the Daniel Ricciardo saga, and really there's no news on that at all. There's been lots of talk of maybe he's going to Mercedes as a reserve driver. I think that it's a lot of what we'll call online speculation about where Daniel may end up, and it's now starting to look more and more like that Daniel Ricciardo won't be in a Formula One car in 2023, or even in a Formula One team in 2023. Only time will tell. Speaking to someone that is back, however, Guan Yu Zhou will be back at the Alfa Romeo team next year alongside Valtteri Bottas. Bottas is in the middle of a multi-year deal, and Guan Yu Zhou will be back for 1 year, 2023, and renewable after that. But that means that team lineup stays as is going into the next season, and I think that that's probably a smart move from everyone at the Alfa team. So all in all, there's been quite a bit of driver movement, and I think there's still quite a lot to come. We know that there are quite a lot of places that have been sorted already, and certainly those key spots were sorted some time ago or were already in the middle of contract terms. But we're going to see more of that next year, because I know there's a lot of IndyCar drivers that come up for renewal next year, and there'll be a lot of Formula One drivers that come up for renewal next year. And I stress this, that we haven't seen the last of it yet, and I think that there'll still be some surprises before the year's out, that's for sure. So next up, news. But before we get into it, well, it is news really. It's the FIA super license debacle, as I'm going to call it. Now, I have thought long and hard about this in the Colton Herta scenario and whether or not he was fit to drive in Formula One. I think he is. There's absolutely no doubt. When you can hurl an IndyCar around the famous Indianapolis Motor Speedway, then you're capable of driving in Formula One, and I agree on that. Super license points, well, I've kind of taken not a U-turn on it, but I do see where the FIA is coming from. These rules were in place and have been in place for quite some time, and the rules are rules, and at the end of the day we need to abide by rules, because that's what governing of sport is all about. And the rules state that you have to have a certain number of super license points, and it is to foster growth from Formula 3 and Formula 2 without a doubt. There is no hidden agenda in that at all. That's what it's there for, and it's an FIA category. IndyCar isn't. However, and this is the however, I do feel that under the circumstance, when you have a driver of Herta's attributes, then he should be given dispensation, especially when he was so close. He's only 40 odd points away from the points that he needed, and you had multiple Formula One teams looking at him, which clearly said that he had talent, and we've seen that. He's been in the McLaren car already, and great reports from that. Now, what that has done though is meant that Herta may not ever get to Formula One unless something else changes, because seats are going to get sewn up for multiple years now, and as we know, McLaren's a shut shop, and I think ultimately AlphaTauri will become a closed shop. And now, whether or not Gasly still goes to AlphaTauri, only time will tell. I think that he will, but then you need a suitable replacement. Gasly goes to Alpine, and then you need a suitable replacement for him at AlphaTauri. Now, is New Zealander Lawson the person? I'd like to think so, but I think that politics will play a part in that. So at the end of the day, I don't think that we're going to see any change, and we're going to see someone else line up in the Alpine car, and Gasly will become a victim of the Herta scenario. But in the end of the day, yes, rules are rules. The FIA had a point. I don't necessarily agree with it, but rules are rules, and we have to abide by them. More news, the NTT IndyCar Series announced its 2023 calendar with 17 races taking place in 2023. Pretty much a mirror image of the calendar that we've seen this year, with this season kicking off in St. Petersburg, then straight to the High Bank Oval at Texas. Hopefully there'll be a crowd, and then it really kicks in, and then we head towards that magic month of May, and then the condensed part of the middle season, with the season ending yet again at Laguna Seca Raceway. So it's a big season ahead, 17 races. I'm sure there'll be plenty as we count down to that kicking off again towards the tail end of February next year, which at the moment seems a hell of a long time away. Formula One also announced parts of its calendar, including the fact that there will be 6 sprint races next year within their calendar. I'm not a fan of the sprint races, never have been. I think that it detracts from what the Grand Prix weekend and the heritage of the Grand Prix weekend is all about. But however, there'll be 6 of them next year. That also means that there's points up for grabs. So points make a championship, and that's the way it's going to be. So that will be interesting to see. A lot of news around the Vegas Grand Prix. I've been modelling this and looking at it and looking at scenarios. We now know that it'll be a very late start on the Saturday night in Vegas, 1 p.m. if you live on the east, or 1 a.m. if you live on the East Coast in the US, and 10 o'clock at night in Vegas itself, which will make it around breakfast time in Europe. So that's kind of what it's aimed for. But it's going to be a blue ribbon event like nothing that Vegas has seen before, and probably nothing that Formula One's seen before. Miami raised the benchmark this year. Vegas is going to take it up another notch. I've looked at hotel sites already, and all they're doing is taking expressions of interest and your desire to have a hotel room during the Grand Prix period. You can't book anything. Even the scuzzy ones, you cannot book them, let alone the high-end ones. And I've had rumours of the fact that a Grand Prix weekend at a decent level could cost in excess of 50,000 US, which I think that means you're really living it up. And I'd like to think that if I went to the Vegas Grand Prix, I'd be doing it for way, way less than that. But anyway, that's going to happen next year. It'll be a phenomenal event. A lot of road resurfacing to do down the strip in Vegas. I was there only a few months ago on the way back from Indianapolis, Indianapolis, and there is a lot of work to do, but that city is more than capable of doing it. I've seen structures being built in the period of months there, so it's more than capable of doing it, and it'll be a great Grand Prix. Then finally, in a bit of Kiwi news as well, Nick Cassidy having a consecutive win in the DTM this week, winning again in Belgium in his AlphaTauri car. Great to see Cassidy do this. I think it says a lot about his stature to the teams that he's been around all those years in Japan in the Super Nippon Series or Super Formula Series. Just fantastic. And Cassidy is a world-class driver, and he's backed it up with 2 wins over consecutive DTM rounds, and that's something that New Zealanders should be extremely proud of. Nick Cassidy is well worthy of that. And then there's the young Kiwi Louis Sharp taking out a win at the recent round of the British F4 series at Silverstone, the spiritual home of motorsport, you might say. Sharp taking his first year in British Formula 4. It's been a big year for him. The Rodin New Zealand sponsored driver doing a great job. Got some great people around him, and when you consider his age, he's really doing a great job. He'll go into the final round of the championship, actually in contention for 3rd place in the championship with 1 round remaining. So great news from Louis Sharp, really good solid effort. And then just before we go rounding it out, 2 big things on the calendar coming up. World Rally Championship being held in New Zealand this weekend, kicking off actually tonight as I do this podcast, so Thursday in New Zealand, with the ceremonial special stage around the Auckland Domain, and then it really kicks it into action over the next 3 days. As you can see, here I am outside. The weather, not exactly ideal for spectating, but it's going to make the roads extremely hard, fast. I think it'll be great. Some fantastic stages, certainly going to try and get out to the Puhoi region one near where I live. It'll be great to see the WRC cars back in action. It was, however, announced just this morning the fact that WRC will not return to New Zealand in 2023. I think that's a crying shame. There's been so much effort go on, but they're very hopeful that they'll be back in 2024. So let's hope that for everyone involved in the New Zealand version of the WRC event, that it comes back in 2024. I know how much hard work's gone on. It deserves to be back, so let's hope you're back on the calendar in 24 where you belong. And then, of course, next week, the big one, a date at the mountain for so many people. It's the Bathurst 1000 event. I think I'll probably be glued in front of the TV for about 4 days. I've already warned the wife, so she knows it's coming. Great race. Wildcard entry, obviously, with Richie Stanaway and Greg Murphy from New Zealand. I think that there'll be a mixture of guys that'll be in contention in that race. Shane van Gisbergen coming straight from Rally New Zealand, straight back to the mountain. So he's got a lot of things to do. Garth Tander betting in the car this week at a last test session, I believe, at Winton. So that'll be, as always, just a phenomenal race, and a bit like the Indy 500. It's one of those races that you know something's going to happen. It's just a case of when it happens, and then it's that chase for that last part of the race. So at Indy, it's the last 25 laps or 15 laps. At Bathurst, it's really that last half hour. So really looking forward to that. Great supercar event, always has been, always will be. It's an iconic event. That pretty much wraps up things in this rapid fire Racing World show this week. Lots of driver movement, as we said. I think there's more to come. We'll have more for you again next week. But until then, thanks so much for liking, sharing and subscribing and commenting. Really appreciating it. We've got some big events coming. We're going to do a special show from Western Springs Speedway in a couple of weeks as well, and talk about the American and Australian drivers that are coming there as well. But until then, continue to share and like Racing World. It means a lot. It will continue the growth of the show. It's just the way it works on YouTube. So I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, and we'll catch you again on Racing World very soon.